Biden and his team are incompetent. They are amateurs, and so are people in the rest of Europe. The UK, it's like if you're looking for a bigger bunch of morons, just go to London.
The death of God is about the drying up of a horizon of meaning and of a whole form of human life.
Where do we stand in the illusion it makes? What kind of space are we invited into?
The material relations between people become social relations between things. When we look at toasters, corn, and TVs,
we still, to a large extent, live in the interregnum between worlds, if you will, or between paradigms. Not many people in the history of the world have faced that.
Diet Soap is a Sublation Media podcast. So Margaret Kimberley is a long-time friend and guest, and we started talking when this podcast was originally called Diet Soap, I think 2010, something like that.
Early? Oh, wow.
maybe it was 2011, but it was a while ago. We've been talking on and off for over a decade now, Margaret. So
wow.
Yeah. So it seems like it's been a decade since I talked to you last. And every time I have you on lately, it's always like, Margaret, the world is gone crazy. Everything is wrong. Well, I need to talk to you again because you can help me try to figure this
I hope so.
And this time it's Ukraine. Mm-hmm. It's the potential for another world war.
Yes.
That seems to have emerged. And I mean, it has definitely emerged. That potential can't be denied, I don't think. And I'm looking around at my comrades on the left and seeing at best confusion.
Yeah.
And at worst, capitulation to I would call it the blob, like the Washington, mm-hmm. D.C. consensus.
Right.
Just sort of a falling in line. Mm-hmm. Behind a long-standing American policy mm-hmm. of basically U.S. adventurism around the world and intervention mm-hmm. and violence and conflict. And I recently had on a couple of Marxist humanists from the News and Letters who were completely convinced that the struggle of the Ukrainian people against Putin was a struggle for socialism. And that, I mean, that may be not quite fair, but I think it's close to being fair. And that we had to help the Ukrainian people defend themselves against the fascist Putin. And that's not my perspective.
No. Okay, good. Have to fight.
We're not going to fight. But I also interviewed Max Blumenthal. Earlier on, and who was advocating for a multipolar world, seeming to think that Putin's invasion, while unjustified in terms of legality, was predictable and understandable, and that the need for a multipolar world was palpable. But I don't know if I'm being entirely fair to Max Blumenthal either, but that seemed to be his position, if I can remember it correctly.
Okay.
So I want to ask you, do you think that the best outcome that we could have that could come out of the war in Ukraine is a checking of U.S. power and the setting up of a multipolar world?
Oh, sure. Absolutely. I think I have to say these the word left is very problematic in this country. There are people who get to call themselves leftists who I just think aren't. So if you support U.S. aggression, if you support U.S. foreign policy, you're not a leftist. It just is not a left position. It can't be. Even if one can debate, and I've seen very principled debate about Russia's actions, about Putin's decision to go in. People who are most definitely on the left by any definition disagreeing about that. But to side with the U.S. is not a left position. It just isn't. And having happened, and I also want to say, even even if you say Putin should not have done it, I think it's very important to talk about what led to this. To talk about the 2014 coup against the elected president, Viktor Yanukovych, who's always described as Putin's ally or something. He was the elected president of Ukraine. He was overthrown in a coup. The U.S. sided with right-wing forces to get him out of office. This set off a chain of events. Part of Ukraine, the Donbass region in particular, did not want to be part of this coup government. There was a civil war. And these are not the first deaths, 14,000 people dead in that region. Efforts to bring about peace that were simply ignored by the US, the Minsk agreements, the Minsk II agreement from 2015, a long time ago, which got unanimous approval in the UN Security Council, which Ukraine signed. And basically, they agreed to give some level of autonomy to Donbass, to declare their neutrality, to look at their constitution, and they just never did it because, and the U.S. never, and Ukraine is a de facto U.S. Colony, let's be clear. The U.S. didn't push them on it, and European nations didn't push them on it. So all of these things led to these events, the failure of diplomacy. And I also think, if you remember back in January, Bush, I keep calling him Bush. Biden made this.
Well, what's the difference? Go ahead, Bush,
Biden. Made this strange remark when they were like, Russia's going to invade, and people were debating whether that was true or not. And he said, well, if it was a little incursion, just a mini incursion, it was very strange. It was like, well, was this Joe just being confused? I think, and other people think, he gave the game away. They wanted to instigate something, and there had been new attacks on the Donbass region, that they wanted to kill the Nord Stream 2, the pipeline agreement between Germany and Russia. They wanted to sanction Russia, so they wanted to cause something to happen. So I don't think they got what they wanted. I think it blew up in their faces. And the end result, the worst thing, of course, is that people are dead. So that is my take. I think we have to talk about all of those things, even as we debate whether or not Russia's actions were justified or not.
Now, the current president, Zelensky, everyone's hero, the cause celeb of the moment, President Zelensky, was not brought in by that coup, right? He came in.
No,
later.
He came afterwards.
And he's also democratically elected president, an outsider to a degree. I mean, he's funded by oligarchs, but but he had to create his own party. And well, have you seen? You haven't. I propagandized myself when this started, and I watched Zelensky's Servant of the People, which was the name of his party as well. But it was this TV show on in 2015, and I watched like 3 or 4 episodes of Servant of the People, and it's the story of this common history teacher living in an apartment with his parents and his niece, and how he came to be, because of a viral video, how he came to be the president of Ukraine despite the fact that no oligarch supported him, and how he was trying have you ever seen the movie Dave?
I did not see it. Sorry.
in the 90s, there was a movie called Dave, and it's like a guy who looks like the president gets to be president because the president has a stroke. So it's like an average guy gets to be president, and so he does things like get his accountant friend in to balance the budget so they can keep the homeless shelters going and get to keep the national program going and things like that. And so that's the sort of feeling you get from watching Zelensky. It's like, okay, he's going to be against corruption on the side of common sense and the common people. He's kind of a clownish character, but not like a stupid character, but just sort of, like a situational comedy character would be, relatable. And so I watched Zelensky, and then see that he's actually became the president of Ukraine based on the popularity of his own persona. And he did represent, I think, for the people of Ukraine, an attempt to get rid of kind of corruption
Mhm.
that dominated Ukraine to get to some sort of formal bourgeois democracy, not some socialist utopia, but just sort of like, we'll enter the EU, we'll have some sort of industry, we'll get rid of all this, we won't have to bribe every official in our life to get things done, we'll have a functioning society. That's what he kind of promised. And from my perspective, because of the conflict between NATO, the United States, and Russia, that dream was completely crushed by both sides.
Sure.
Yeah, so I bring that up just to say that the problem here is you can't really cast the Ukrainian people now, the Ukrainian nation, as merely a puppet of the United States, because there was a force for reform that was maybe not as strong as it should have been. It's definitely facing a lot of setbacks. And I'm not saying like Zelensky is some sort of saint, but there was an attempt to change that society going on, and he couldn't control it. Like there's Blumenthal mentions this, like
Yeah.
he would go to Donbass and say, look,
Mhm.
I want a ceasefire, turn in your weapons. And they were like, who the hell are you? And he says,
Exactly.
I'm not some loser. I'm the president of
Yes.
Ukraine.
Yes.
So, yeah, it's a really difficult situation overall. And one of the things that I asked Blumenthal, and maybe I'll just ask this to you, is why do you think it is that Russia and the United States, Russia and NATO, developed this conflict after the collapse of the Soviet Union? Why wasn't there a solid attempt to bring Russia into NATO? Why couldn't there be a settling of the disagreements and the conflicts between Russia and the Western world?
Well, a couple of things. You're right about Zelensky. He won by campaigning for peace. He said he would end the war in Donbass.
Mm-hmm.
But these forces, while that's what the people, it's kind of like the US, where politicians say things because they know that's what people want. So that's what the people wanted. But the people who really control Ukraine, the oligarchic class, they don't want to change anything. The oligarch who sponsored him, a guy named Kolomoisky, is, and I want to point out something else here, who, like Zelensky, is also Jewish, but he also funds the Azov battalion. These fascists, these neo-Nazis are muscle for the oligarchic class. And someone explained it to me as, being fascist there is more about being anti-Russian. And that is an explanation for how Jews can be supportive of them. And I'm like, oh, okay, I'll go with that. But you're absolutely right about Zelensky. He did want to bring about peace, but those forces did not want him to. And to have this military, like the Azov battalion, these people are an obstacle to peace, an obstacle to getting rid of corruption, because they exist to continue the war, to continue their protection for the corrupt people. And Ukraine is one of the poorest countries in Europe, one of the most kleptocratic. So I wanted to say that just to back up what you were saying. But the whole point about Russia and NATO is not what we're told it is. It's not this defensive alliance. It's an aggressive alliance. And a lot of their aggression is to try to, there was this, and it's a fantasy, and these people, unfortunately, are in power to break up Russia, to contain Russia. And it isn't going to happen. It's a futile effort. It's a very dangerous effort, but unfortunately, these people believe it. I believe they can do that. So no, they didn't want to have. You may, like me, remember that thought we would get a peace dividend. It's like, well, if there's no Soviet Union, there's no need to spend all this money on defense, right? Remember that? But the exact opposite happened. They kicked them while they were down. This was an opportunity to expand Western, that is to say, capitalist hegemony. So former Soviet republics became independent and then became members of NATO. Warsaw Pact countries became members of NATO, but it's not enough for them. And I was having a conversation with someone earlier. These are people who don't believe in diplomacy. It's our way or the highway. So there was no honest discussion, no good faith negotiations with Russia because they want it all. They want Russia. And notice in the 90s, when oligarchs really ran Russia, I'm not going to say they have no power now, but Putin got them out of politics. Under Yeltsin, when oligarchs really ran Russia, it was fine with Washington. Yeltsin was our guy. So they did not want an independent Russia. They did not want a Russia that could be a competing power of the U.S., but it is a competing power.
Why do you think that is? Why wouldn't the United States want to have other nations develop to their full capacity under capitalism? And I'll, like, if you look back to after World War II, there was an effort to get the Japanese people and Japanese nation up and running, to reinvest in the Japanese economy, to develop them economically so that they would be integrated into a world capitalist system. And, later on in the 80s, we started to be a little bit concerned about the threat from Japan. I remember being, movies like Gung Ho. Do you remember that movie? Yeah, like, oh no, they're coming. They're gonna outcompete us. But it seems to me like the dream of capitalism is to have every nation be productive and democratic and riven with class problems. But why didn't we want an equal trading partner, a productive trading partner, rather than this sort of region of chaos?
Their goal is supremacy. And so, every country's either, what did Bush say? You're either with us or against us. So that's it. You either have to be with us, you have to be a vassal state, or we have to crush you. So that means getting control of resources, or it could be oil, it could be gold, it could be anything. Sometimes it means just subjugating any country. Like, why does the U.S. need to determine who runs Nicaragua?
I want to remind you that GCAS is Sublation Media's one and only sponsor. They are an educational institution offering accredited degrees, and they are running seminars in critical theory, psychoanalysis, communication, philosophy, and literature. Upcoming seminars include Rocky Gangle on Spinoza's Ethics, Keith Faulkner's seminar on the genealogy of ideas, including lectures on Nietzsche, Foucault, and Deleuze, Emily Russin on George Bataille's Religion Without Religion, and many others. If you're interested in a radical education, follow the link to GCAS in the description. Supporting GCAS is a good way to support Sublation Media.
The goal is now to have full domination, full spectrum dominance is the goal, is to control everything and subjugate everyone. So China was first, everything was fine. China would make cheap products for Walmart, and China gets in the WTO. China's great until they develop economic prowess and they become a competitor. So now the goal is just to dominate. So nobody can be a friend who, unless they are an allied state, unless they're a puppet, then you can be, then everything's good. Or you can be one of these little countries that's just victimized all the time, and everybody else has to go along or be crushed, except that you can't do it without posing great dangers to the world. And having had Ukraine blow up in their faces, they're screwing around with China regarding Taiwan. And they want Taiwan to be the next Ukraine. So, and we have people who are delusional. I have to say that. I find that there used to be these statesmen who, even if they did something that I thought was really horrible, they were smart people. But Biden and his team are incompetent. They are amateurs, and so are people in the rest of Europe. The UK, it's like if you're looking for a bigger bunch of morons, just go to London, or the new German chancellor. It's where the Europeans refuse to stand up for themselves. I mean, look what Germany did. They had this pipeline completed with Russia, and then gave it up after the U.S. instigated this crisis. But the short answer is, what they want is domination and peaceful coexistence and building up other countries. That's yesterday's news. It doesn't work for them now.
But why is it that again, like after World War II, there wasn't a need to dominate Japan in that way to install maybe there was a need to make sure they were politically our allies, and sure, their military was decommissioned and they weren't going to be a military threat anymore. But there was a sense that we wanted the Japanese people and for Japan to be a self-reliant and developing economy in the world. And and it seems to me that you've got to look at like the difference between like Fordism at that period of time and neoliberalism later. Like something changed in the economy that created a new approach to foreign policy where and I guess the other thing I throw out there is like how the EU is cracking up, right? But the EU did come into existence even under neoliberalism, and within the European Union there's dominant states like Germany dominates the rest of the EU because of its productive capacity. And there's a lot of resentment from other European nations along those lines. And yet, it doesn't come down to like the Germany deciding, well, what we really want is for Poland to fall into complete chaos, to be run by oligarchs and have the civil society and, the social order completely crack up. I mean, maybe it could get to that point but I just wonder, maybe it comes down to old standing grudges between, an animosity that just developed historically. But it just seems like why couldn't Russia be part of the EU? Why couldn't we want the development of their nation?
It's this question of this common sense approach where everybody gets something that they want is just not allowed anymore. I think you answered part of your question in talking about neoliberalism, which demands this sort of domination. There are others who say, people frankly more well-versed than I am, that at this stage of capitalism, this is inevitable, that this is the moment where capitalism starts to eat itself. And even another capitalist country can become an enemy if it doesn't allow the system to have its way everywhere. So China is a socialist government, but they've got capitalism of a kind. Russia's definitely capitalist, but they're enemies because they won't do what this side tells them to do. And that is the stage of development where we are now, where it has to be total domination or nothing else. And you're right, neoliberalism, austerity, all of these things have changed. That world is now passé. And I think the fall of the Soviet Union was one of the things that hurt the world so much. And this is what I mean. There was this counterpoint for this system. So you had to make the case. In order to make the case for our country, you had to say, so if someone said, for example, socialist countries, they take care of the people. So the United States could say, well, you got Social Security, you got Medicare, you've got this, you've got that. So, we're doing all right. And then when that leading country just disappeared, then it's socialism doesn't work. We don't have to do anything for you. In fact, we can take from you. We can take from other countries. We don't have to, I hate to say we when I'm talking about our government and the people who run this system, but anyway.
Yeah, no, I understand.
There's no more need to make the case for our system, no more need to appeal to people to be on our side. And then you're the bully on the block. You're the biggest bully with the biggest bat or the biggest gun, and everybody can just do what you want. But that didn't last forever. The United States created this the economic prowess of China, and Russia. I'm sorry, I wanted to say something else about the EU. The purpose of the EU was to move capital around. I mean, that was the easiest thing. So you give people some goodies. So if you have a French passport, you could live in Germany, but the real thing was if you lived in Poland, you could be a source of cheap labor in Paris. Mm-hmm. So that was the real reason for the EU, and it's also why it doesn't meet people's needs very well. Why you had a Brexit and talk of Brexit-like actions in other countries. And as far as Russia, I think you're right about historical grievance and prejudices against this country. Russia's a vast country with a lot of resources. Part of it is they want their stuff and they want to get it for a song. They don't want to have to deal with Russia as a co-equal. But you see, one of the things that happened after the fall of the Soviet Union was the destruction of Yugoslavia, which was independent of the Soviet Union. But they didn't want a strong socialist state in Europe, and that's why US and NATO destroyed it and broke it up. So even though Russia became capitalist too, it's still seen as this other. It's still seen as this place to be conquered. And I think something happening now, they can't go or feel like they can't go back. So having had Ukraine blow up like this, instead of talking, which is the thing that should happen, and however you feel about how this happened, I think everyone should agree there should be talks. But that's not what they want to do. They are still hoping. And if you follow people who are informed, that they all agree Ukraine is losing. I mean, and Russia has a bigger army, better equipment, more soldiers. So the defeat was inevitable. And we're seeing it now, very methodical destruction of Ukraine's military. But there's nobody to say, let's stop right here. Or when it first began in late February to say, all right, let's talk to Putin. Before this whole thing got worse and worse and worse for the Ukrainian people, who everyone claims to care about so much. So that's my my answer. I guess I think I went off on a slight tangent.
No, it's fine. But you raised something that at the beginning there of your answer that I want to come back to, which is about if this kind of conflict is inevitable, and at this stage in capitalism, and our aim as socialists is to get beyond capitalism. How do we think about this crisis in a way that's opportune for us? Because I worry, like when I talk to Max Blumenthal, that the vision of let's say a Russian victory here is the vision of a world divided up into like 2 or 3 capitalist powers in conflict with each other. And that could be very bad for working people. Not that the world dominated by one capitalist power is any good,
no,
right? But just that it's not a better world to conceive of China and Russia and the United States, trying to divide up the world through proxy wars and straight up kind of counter imperialist conquest. Like I don't like the idea of my future being, and my kids' future being one in which they live in a world which the leaders of the world treat like a game of Risk.
Correct.
Yeah.
I see what you mean. It's hopefully what I would like to see. I mean, let's just talk briefly about what I would like to see.
Yeah, like what would you like to see come out of
this multipolar world that everyone talks about? And, it's funny thing, even during the Cold War, the US acknowledged that that the Soviet Union had a sphere of influence. So they might condemn when they cracked down in Hungary or Czechoslovakia, but they didn't do anything. They were like, well, that's the Soviet sphere. We're going to leave that alone because that's theirs. Not that they never competed ever, but just a recognition of other nations' sovereignty. And a recognition that, yes, if China goes to Africa and gives loans with better terms than the World Bank, well, yes, African countries are going to take money from China. Why wouldn't they? So in my fantasy world, they would say, okay, fine, China gets to, build a railroad in Kenya, which they did. And that's okay with us. And who cares about who runs Nicaragua, this little country with 6 million people? Fine, let them elect whoever they want. That is the world.
But during the time when the Soviet Union existed, the United States did not. That was our sphere of influence, and the United States did not accept.
Exactly. And or like Grenada, this tiny little island, because Cuba built an airport. The U.S. had to crush their revolution. There'd be no crushing of peoples why don't I dream big? And countries could be free to make their own choices, and countries could be free to be allied with this one or that one, and the other side wouldn't.
But that means going beyond spheres of influence, right? Because one of the things about that is that you're like, okay, like with Nicaragua or with an African nation wanting to get railroad loans, they wouldn't be constricted because of their geographic location and their
right. They could do what they wanted to do.
Right. So they basically, I come back to this all the time. Like in the movie Network, remember the movie Network? You ever see that one? There's a scene where Ned Beatty is like telling the lead broadcaster, the star of the movie, like, you've got it all wrong. There are no nations anymore. There's only AT&T and DuPont and Conoco and Coca-Cola. And, everything is going to be dealt with by dollars, and somebody invests there, then they have to reinvest somewhere else. And that's the vision that you have, because what you're saying is all these capitalists should be able to make deals. Like it's Donald Trump's vision. It's not at its best, the art of the deal, which I think is like, a fine thing. I'd love it if it would work, because it's like, if we could just say like, okay, we're going to go out and get the best deal we can from whoever's going to offer us the best terms. We're going to trade. We're going to make a little profit for ourselves, run our little nations, and and through this, everyone will benefit.
Right. And if countries did not want to participate, if they're like a weird straight up socialist country, they'd be left alone to do whatever they wanted to do. And, this whole notion of, it makes me crazy that people still talk about America's backyard, and the whole hemisphere is America's backyard. And that a country in this hemisphere, in South Central America or the Caribbean, could ally themselves with whoever they wanted without fear of interference from the United States. I mean, the sanctions, the blockade against Cuba is now 60 years old. The U.S. has been creating misery for Cubans for 60 years, to try to pressure them to do what the U.S. wants them to do, which is not have the system that they want to have. So in that world, the U.S. would say, we don't care. Okay, Cuba, do your thing.
It is crazy that there should still be a blockade against Cuba, especially after Castro is gone, the Soviet Union is gone. I mean, what is to stop Cuba from becoming an equal partner with the capitalists? And also considering, like, look, we accept China. Well, China, I mean, I think China is a capitalist country, but they're not. The system of government might be closer to what we object to being in Cuba. I don't know if that's true, but
yeah,
like we use this love of democracy as a way to justify blockading countries, and so we'll say, oh, China's an autocratic and a totalitarian, and we can't abide that, but we abide it when they're powerful enough economically.
Yeah, well, let me just say this about loving democracy. I think the people here love democracy. The people at the top don't. It's a word used for propaganda purposes. They don't care about democracy here. We don't get, I mean, look at all the things that Americans want that we're told we cannot have. We cannot have them. We can't complain about it. And we have to go along with the people who keep lying to us. So that's not democracy. So that's what you want, what I want, what the people want. But that's not what our oligarchic class wants. It's not what their servants, the politicians, want. So, they always claim it's democracy. This is, a humanitarian intervention, even as you're bombing people or something like that. That's the word to use to get buy-in from us. Because if they were honest, if they said, well, we just want to screw with Cuba for the sake of doing it. And we don't care that I was told recently that death rates from breast cancer are going up because their mammogram machines, they can't replace their mammogram machines. And if you told people that, I think most people would say, well, that's terrible. How can we do that to another country? But they don't tell you that. They just talk about democracy, vilify another country, call somebody else autocratic, a dictatorship, whatever the word of the moment is, to get public buy-in for doing something evil. So, but also in my fantasy world, we'd have a real democracy here. And that's why the fact that we don't have one here is why the US is an enemy of democracy in the rest of the world. The people here would have their needs met. We would have a political system that reflected our needs and our desires. Our public money would be spent on the things that we wanted it spent for, instead of military spending, which is it's now a majority of the discretionary spending is for defense. That is to say, for Raytheon and McDonnell Douglas, et cetera. So that's my world, but we don't have that world. So what do we do? I think one of the first things we can do is just to speak the truth, just to say, no, actually, we don't have a democracy. Can we stop saying that? No, the Democrats are the Democrats better than the Republicans? Really? Well, you're the ones who didn't defend Roe v. Wade when you could have. And now they want us to jump into action and sign petitions and write checks to stop the evil Republicans from doing what they let them do in the first place. So I think the first thing we have to do is to speak the truth about the situation we have, about what our country does here and around the world. I think we should start there. But it's hard to even start there when people here are so indoctrinated. And I think liberals are the most indoctrinated people. I don't think it's the MAGA hat wearing January 6th people. I think liberals are the most indoctrinated.
Well, okay, that last statement I want to talk to you about, because I'm going to tout another program, another podcast called Blogging Heads. You know about Blogging Heads? You ever heard of it?
Maybe.
There's just two old white guys from the New Republic started Blogging Heads. There's a Robert Wright and Mickey Kaus. Okay. And Mickey Kaus was a former member of SDS, who became Clintonite, pro-welfare reform type advocate in the 90s, and a Trump supporter, voted for Trump twice in the last decade. Like he went from Marxism to the right, for sure. Okay. And Bob Wright is this sort of middle of the road liberal, wants a world order based on international law, likes Buddhism, has a newsletter called the Non-Zero Newsletter, which is like, we don't have to run the world like it's a zero-sum game. Everyone can benefit. We think he wants advocates for cognitive empathy. Think about what the other guy's interests are. You don't have to like feel empathy, but like think through what the other person's position is in the world stage. And I find that those are liberals. Those are two liberals, two different kinds of liberals. The Trump supporting liberal, like classical liberal, like capitalist, full on embracing capital, and Robert Wright, liberal. And then there's like the Democratic progressives, there's a different thing maybe. And I find it really helpful to start by thinking about like, what would just the promises of bourgeois society be? Like, what does capitalism say that we're supposed to be? And one of the things it says is this kind of shit isn't supposed to happen. We're all supposed to be able to trade with each other and get along. There's supposed to be rules of law, international law, and it just keeps failing. And so that's why, like, what I wish for is some political force in the world that could say to Biden, Zelensky, and Putin, you cannot put us all at risk this way. Mm-hmm. You have to stop. This has to stop. There has to be a negotiated settlement. We don't care. Listen to the people in Donbass. Listen to the people in Ukraine. But we want to work together to create some sort of peaceful settlement here, because we cannot accept being split apart this way and the threat of Armageddon being held over the world's head because of disagreements about what? Oil pipelines and trade routes, or who looks tough and who doesn't? I mean, this is not,
Well, I would like that too. But as I said, we don't get that here. So
no, I know we don't. That's why we'd have to be aiming here at Biden, right? Like, our task would be to put Biden's feet to the fire and say, look, this is not acceptable. The escalation in Ukraine is not acceptable.
Well, it's funny. I had this idea about what I could say to Democrats to wake them up, to shake them up, so they don't think that their only option is to keep supporting these horrible people who treat them badly. And I think we have to use the power that we have. And I was thinking about, what can I tell people? Stop voting for Democrats. If the United States it appears, I don't know if you've seen this story, they changed the State Department website, which clearly enunciated the one China policy. There's one China, Taiwan's part of China, and they've changed it recently, like within the last week or so. And there is a concern that they are actually going to recognize Taiwan as independent, which is a red line for China. And I was thinking you could maybe tell the Democrats, if Biden recognizes Taiwan, I'm not voting for you. Just some clear-cut red line issue. If you don't fix the baby formula crisis, oh my God, talk about a system in crisis, I'm not going to vote for you. Something very clear. And I think, but in order to get to that point, there has to be a recognition that our system does not work for us. And it's hard, I think, for a lot of people to even admit that. So it's easy to personalize. It's easy to say, oh, Trump, he's so horrible. And I'm not saying he wasn't, but there is a resistance. There's a lot of resistance to being truthful about the society that we have now. I mean, I was thinking about this, world that we wanted. I mean, we used to have. I mean, when I was younger, you had an expectation of having a living wage job, and you didn't have to be in debt your whole life to go to college. And all of these things that we were told we could have, well, many people had them. But it's all been taken away from us. And these people who took it away want to keep taking things away. Why is there no Build Back Better bill? Because there are people who said, yeah, they got enough. That's it. They got a little stimulus. They got the rescue plan. That's all we're going to allow. Mm-hmm. And it's not mansion and cinema. So, people say, well, I'd like to help you, but mansion and cinemas, it's them. So what I would like to see happen first, and I think this does have to happen first, is this willingness to let go of the charade, the willingness to let go of the idea of American exceptionalism and white supremacy, which plays out not just with the mass shooter, not just with people in the Klan. It plays out in a lot of different ways that people don't think about, this belief that this country is basically good. And if we just nibble around the edges, everything will be okay. So I'm having said that, I'm not sure how to make it happen, but I think we have to encourage truth telling, which it may be easy for me, it may be easy for you, but I think it's very difficult for a lot of people. So I think we have to start there, and then we can know what to do next. But you have to know you have to do something. You have to know that the system itself is at fault, rather than saying, why are there homeless encampments everywhere? Well, hello, it's this system that we have. And to saying that's why. That's why you have it. The system wants it. They want homeless people. They want a big defense budget. They want you to live a precarious existence. They want you to have gig work. They want you to be in student loan debt. To acknowledge that is the way this country is run and what the people at the top want. They don't want anything that's good for us. So having said that, I'm not sure how to move people along, but I think that's essential. I think it's really essential for people to know and to own the real situation, which, is difficult.
Well, you bring up the homeless situation. I'm going to briefly say something about another project that we're going to be starting. I have a friend who works on Skid Row, who is a social worker on Skid Row, and she deals with the people who are most mentally ill on Skid Row. And she is going to be doing a podcast with a legal aid worker, a guy who's a lawyer who provides legal aid to the poor, and to talk about kind of the lies of progressivism and the way in which the industry and the bureaucracy that has arisen around in poverty not intentionally, but perpetuates the status quo. It perpetuates an acceptance of what should be unacceptable, even as they do reach out and provide aid and are kind of providing essential resources. At times, there's also sort of a mentality that arises that you have to ignore how inhuman and unacceptable the situation is that you're trying to cope with. And so they're going to be talking about all the different ways that the system rationalizes what is completely irrational. And I think that in reality, it's not actually the case that there's the political class that wants everybody to be insecure and impoverished. And I think that the reality is that the political class would like it if everyone had a nice job and went to work, came home, had their little lives, did what they were supposed to do. They got up in the morning, did it again, and we could reproduce ourselves every day. But they can't manage it. That isn't possible under this system. Like, that falls apart. Like, you have to have a reserve army of the unemployed. Yeah. But not just because it's useful to discipline workers, but also because the economy can't take in everyone. They can't manage it to avoid conflicts between nations, because the system itself that they're trying to manage sets that all up. And they have no vision as to how to get beyond this system.
Well, I think there may be some people who genuinely want things to be better, but I'm not so sure of that anymore. I think there are people who, they like the chaos. Really? I think there's several groups. There are people who would prefer things be different, but they don't have the guts to fight against it. I think that's most of the progressives in Congress who, talk but don't ever do anything. In their heart of hearts, that they probably want something different, but they aren't fighters. So they go along, and rationalize it. Then there are people who are cynics. And then there are people who genuinely want this, because if something keeps happening, it's because somebody wants it to happen. There are people who, yes, they want, look at Amazon. Amazon needs, we talk about reserve labor force. They burn through so many workers. Their working conditions are so bad that in some places they've reached a point in these warehouses, they don't have anybody new to take in, because people can't take working like that. And I'm assuming your viewers know that they have the very high rate of workplace injuries. I think
that's going to change, though, Margaret. I have faith in Chris Smalls and the unionization of Amazon.
I do too, but he shouldn't meet with Joe Biden. That was my comment. But at any rate, because Biden needs him, he doesn't need Biden.
Well, I've interviewed him twice. I feel like I rubbed up against celebrity early on. I don't know if he's gonna, have time for me now, but no.
Well, but that's more of what we need. Workers, I mean, that these traditional unions couldn't unionize Amazon warehouses, and finally somebody did it. So that is,
and it came from the rank and file. He came
yes,
from
yes.
it came from the
Yes,
people
I think
who knew the
well,
conditions.
that's, but that raises another issue. There are all these people in positions that we respect. It could be a politician or it could be a long-standing union, and they're not the ones to get it done. It's the rank and file who get these things done. And I think, having said everything else I've said, we need to listen to them more. But yeah, I think we have to admit that these things don't happen consistently over and over by accident. There are people who do want it to be this way, and in order to get what they want, they have to keep individuals down. They have to keep other countries down, but they can't. And this is, I suppose, the contradiction. They can't do it without ruining everything for everybody. So you have these billionaires who clearly know something's wrong. They all want to go to New Zealand or find some safe, quote unquote, place to live, because they know that they've screwed this up so badly. But I think we have to acknowledge there are people who want things are this way because there are people who want them to be this way, and they don't have any interest in doing anything better. So yeah, there are a lot of people, they would like us for all to have a living wage job and all have a roof over our heads. And there are other people who don't care, and there are other people who, in order to get what they want, they have to have a population that is just ground down. And if they're homeless, if they've got a crappy job, they don't care. I will not just don't care. It is what they need to have happen.
Yeah. Listen, we've come up to about 50 minutes here on that's almost an hour.